Welcome to Work Better Live. We're coming to you from the Steelcase Work-Life Center here in Dallas, Texas. And my name is Chris Congdon. I'm the editor of Work Better magazine, and I also host the Work Better podcast, and I'm your host here today for this really great conversation. And today we're going to be talking about creating community at work, which we think is more important than ever before. You know, we're going through a time of a lot of change, and organizations really need community to be that glue that helps them to stay together during times of adversity. I'm very excited that you are all here live, and for those of you who are joining us from around the world, thank you, welcome. And I'm excited to welcome two really accomplished guests. They're so accomplished that I'm going to read a little bit of some of the things these two ladies have done. So I'm grateful to have Lindsay Wilson join us today. She's the president of Corgan, which is a Dallas-based architecture and design firm. She's also the workplace sector leader for the firm, and she's grown this team for over 15 years into 12 different locations. She's worked with organizations like Goldman Sachs, Fossil, Toyota, State Farm. Is just a huge range, and really helping them to transform their organizations by understanding how their workplace can reflect their culture and challenge some conventional thinking. So thanks for being here, Lindsay.
Thanks for having me.
I'm also very glad to have Jayme Schutt join us, who is the Senior Vice President of Workplace Strategy at JLL, which of course is a leader in global real estate services. And with a background of over 14 years of commercial and retail interior design experience. That can't be true. You haven't been working that long, I don't think.
Well, that's only design. Then we got the real estate side.
So, well, right. Jayme blends workplace strategy with office tenant representation. And she's really got a unique perspective that I think allows her to see how space can catalyze organizational success and really help create great employee experiences and develop flexible spaces that evolve with their clients. So thank you for being here, Jayme.
Absolutely, thank you.
I just want to remind everyone that we are going to save time for questions at the end of the conversation here. So if you're joining us remotely, you can put those questions into the Q&A. For those of you who are here, we'd love you to just raise your hand, ask a question. You won't be on camera, so you don't have to worry about that. So I want your stress level to go down a little bit as we go through this conversation. So I want to go back to something I mentioned in the beginning, which is change. And it feels like we're going through a time of just unprecedented change in the way work is really evolving. Feels like the past 5 years, like change has been more prevalent than it ever has been, throughout my whole career, whether it's the ways people are working or changing technology, changing expectations. It just feels like there's a lot. So I'm really interested in knowing about some of the major themes that you're hearing from your clients, and if that's different depending on whether you're talking to a larger client or a smaller one. So Lindsay, let's start with you. What are you seeing?
Well, you said the magic word for us in there, which is expectations. So we have been talking a lot this year, really led by our workplace strategy team, about great expectations. The amount of expectations on the workplace today has never been higher. If you take a minute and think about that, what employees want, what their employers want, what shareholders and stockholders and building owners are looking for. So it's almost impossible to really have a successful workplace until you can really define what those expectations are. So while there has been so much change, we are seeing, and interestingly, especially in the really large companies and the smaller companies, real decisions being made, picking a strategy, even if there's still uncertainty, and starting to make some real moves in their workplaces. I think mid-sized companies are perhaps the most challenged. If they just have a few locations and they're really trying to balance regional differences. The really large organizations, you kind of see that, okay, this is what we're doing, and small ones, because they can build consensus a little more easily. So that would be my read on kind of the spectrum of size and where they are.
Yeah. Jayme, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything, of course, Lindsay's saying. I think to build on that, JLL, we love a stat. And so I thought it'd be fun to kind of start with
We
the
love
stat.
your stats too.
Yes,
There's really good research.
A lot of validation going on between our stats. I think it's fun to know that more than 80%, closer to 90% today of employees want to spend some time in the office. And so I think that's super encouraging for those in real estate and design and furniture. For all of us, there's such opportunity, right, for us to make these spaces something really special and unique for everybody. And we know that the top two reasons that employees want to come into the office are collaboration and camaraderie.
Sure.
And so that ties directly into this conversation today about community, which I think is so exciting. I think, in talking about sort of the evolution of things, brokerage used to once upon a time be kind of a math equation, right? And I'm a broker, so I feel like I can say that it was, number of employees times the square footage, and that equals tours, right? And we hit the market and we went and looked at space. And I think today, Lindsay would agree, we're both so excited that it's so much more complex today, that there is so much more that we can finally get to talk about and think about spaces just in different ways. So, as we're talking about this, you'll probably hear me say this several times throughout the conversation, but I've always said as a designer, and even today, that it's about purpose and not pretty. And so as we're having these conversations of how do we bring community into the space? Well, that's all driven through what is the purpose of the space? What's the vision? What's the mission of your company? And then let's design space around that. And the rest hopefully will just come together.
Yeah. That's such a good point, because aesthetics are important. Everybody likes to be in a beautiful place, right?
Yeah.
But
the people come. We got to understand the purpose.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I want to talk about a couple other forces that are changing the ways people are working and their expectations. There's a number of them, but I think today we're going to just focus on a couple of them. And one is not a big surprise to everybody. We're living through a time where there's a lot of issues with well-being in the workplace, particularly on the mental health side. Like when we used to talk to HR professionals, people were concerned about ergonomics and, healthy lifestyles and all those kinds of things. And they're still important. But I feel like when I'm talking to HR leaders, they're really worried about mental health, anxiety, depression, burnout, all those things that are impacting the way people work. And lots of good thinking about a lot of policies and programs. It feels like the workplace could do more. And so I'm curious, why don't we start maybe with you this time, Jayme, just to talk a little bit about what you're seeing from your perspective with clients on this one.
Yeah, I think absolutely there's an urgency of well-being. I think nobody would deny that. I think too, though, there's an urgency of decision making. And so I think so many of our clients are still kind of grappling with those hard decisions. And we know these decisions are hard. We know it's hard to put a policy in place. We know it's hard to communicate that. We know it's hard to enforce that, and we don't want to mandate things. But employees are looking to understand what that baseline expectation is, right? And so if you think about on paper, all of this flexibility sounds like a wonderful benefit. If I get to choose the day I go into the office, if I get to choose what work I do in the office, that sounds wonderful. But in theory, it leads to decision fatigue. And so, so every morning, if I'm having to wake up and think, okay, do I want to go to the office today? Do I want to stay home? If I have an agile work environment, when I go into the office, where am I going to sit? Where's Chris going to be sitting? And where's my team? What do I wear? And so over time, that starts to increase that anxiety and that burnout just from the get-go of the day, right? So I think starting is really important, just to make those tough decisions. And when we were working from home before, I think none of us would deny that even our home couldn't provide everything that we needed. And we were designing that for just us and maybe one or two other people in our family, right? And so there's so much pressure today put on the office to be everything for everyone, that I think we're kind of forgotten that the idea of balance also comes in the form of location. And so the concept of getting up and going to the office and knowing the work that I'm going to do at the office versus the work that I might also choose to do at home versus the home life, and having that break, I think is incredibly important. Last thing I'll kind of add to that is that I think in kind of carrying on that idea of evolution, that the critical activities within the office has drastically changed. So what we used to think as the critical activity was what? Productivity, getting the work done. And that was it. But now we understand that so much more of what's going on in the office is about that social environment and about creating that community. So it's a really exciting opportunity to get to work in office.
Yeah. Lindsay, what do you think?
I think the decision fatigue that Jayme brings up is very real. And as I mentioned earlier, this organization's choosing their path. This is our policy, even if it has elements of flexibility in it, is so important of a starting point, especially if you're starting a new project or a renovation. Like, get everybody level set. But part of that starting a project is making sure you have all the right people and the information at the table. And it seems like we would be past this at this point, but are the people leaders, are the people who know what the programs are and the policies are at the table during the earliest stages of design, so that we're not under construction saying, oh, if only we had designed a space to do this particular thing. Our clients are spending a lot of money on workplace wellness, on investing in their employees. How can the workplace support those programs? They can't create great well-being, but we know the workplace has an incredible role in facilitating and supporting those things. Agree. The other thing we're seeing is just how investment, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the quality of spaces today, but investment in the workplace makes people feel good, that their employers care about them, that they've invested in the location, even that they've invested in a neighborhood that is going to provide them opportunities to socialize during lunch or after work or work out. So that investment is really foundational to that. I feel good about where I work. They care about me.
Yeah.
So I don't ever want our clients to overlook just the investment they've made is a reflection on how an employee feels.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, that employees feel, it's so tangible when you come into a workplace that's been designed very thoughtfully to support people's well-being and to make sure that, people have a variety of different kinds of spaces that they can choose from. We don't want them to have decision fatigue, but at the same time, we're all a little bit different.
Yeah, it's important.
Autonomy is really important.
Yeah.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
So speaking of well-being, one of the things that is kind of a force changing the way we're working today, you could argue is a bit exciting and a bit anxiety provoking, which is AI. And, I don't know about anybody else here, but I know that, like, when ChatGPT first came out, I felt kind of this mixture of like, wow, that's so cool. And then, wow, do they need me anymore? And I imagine a lot of us maybe have some similar feelings about that. What we've been seeing with a lot of our customers and organizations around the world is that it really is employees who are kind of leading the trend toward using AI a lot more, because as organizations, we might move a little slower. We have to think it through and have policies and procedures in place. But as people, we can just give it a try and experiment. And so that's really kind of leading or pushing organizations in a lot of ways to figure out their policies, but also to figure out the workplace. And so I kind of want to go there with our conversation. Like, Lindsay, maybe you tackle this one to start out with, like, what are some of the things that you're talking about with your clients when it comes to how AI might change the workplace or work?
Sure. So first I'll talk a little bit about attitude and culture toward it. And I'll actually use Corgan as an example. I think the first thing you can kind of detect in how people feel about AI is really a clue about the culture of the organization. So if you are an organization like Corgan is, that experiments with new tools, that loves a pilot program, but I love a pilot program, that will try things out, see what works before fully adopting something, you will find those companies very interested in what AI can do in their workflow, in their workplace. And so, and you're exactly right, at Corgan, it's some of our newest employees bringing forward tools and ideas to try out.
Yep.
I think we're not yet really seeing full adoption of everything that's out there, but certainly trying to prepare workplaces to embrace these tools in the future. Just like every technology revolution prior, right? How can we be ready for rooms that can adjust on their own? How can we be ready for more sensor technology and things like that? But I think we're still like right there on the edge before these things really become ubiquitous in our workplaces.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, maybe I had ChatGPT write all of my responses to this.
You did?
I did not.
Oh, I was going to say,
So now I just wonder.
Yeah, we have like little chat bots going in the background here. Yeah, that's great.
To you, not a chat bot. So
Thank
you're
you.
still needed.
Oh,
yeah.
That makes me feel so much better.
Well, I mean, I echo what Lindsay's saying. I think we're not seeing, wholesale based on AI yet. We might watch. She didn't know what she was talking about, which might happen. But I think we are starting to see the evolution of space, which we've already been seeing based on hybrid and virtual work, right? To Lindsay's point, we're seeing kind of the reconfiguration of conference rooms. We're seeing sensors come in to see how spaces are being utilized. All of these things, a lot more integrated technology rather than just kind of plopping the camera in the space and calling it done. JLL sort of jokes that we're a technology company that happens to do real estate. And so we're testing these, we're creating these, we're piloting these, we're putting things out there. And so we're trying to get in front of that. But I think for anyone who is considering within their organization of adopting AI or, is fully adopting AI, I think communication is so critical in this space. Because we're finding that there's sort of three camps of people in the AI conversation. There's sort of those that are like, I don't care. It's, whatever, it'll come, it'll go. There's then those that are kind of more in the middle, somewhere between interested and adopting. And then there's a third camp of, I'm terrified, don't come for me. And so kind of, like what you were saying, like, is my job going to be needed? And so I think the communication style of rolling out something like technology, I don't think we often think about. But in this case, I think it's so important to understand that AI should be intended to use to enhance human capability, not replace it.
Yeah, absolutely. We embrace that same philosophy. And I think, if we just squint a little bit and say, well, like, how will this begin to change some of our behaviors at work? Like, I already have Siri chime in, sometimes uninvited, into conversations that I have. It's not too far down the road when we'll start having like our digital assistants or our agents, starting to verbalize with us. So, I mean, I think we could see not too far down the road that we're going to have to think about the acoustics in the workplace if people are having conversations. I had a chance to interview Mike Pell, Microsoft, and he was telling me about how basically conference rooms are going to start going even beyond like the note taking that I think you guys already use today, don't you?
Yes. We're huge fans of the Corgan note taker.
But imagine not too far down the road when the room actually kind of participates.
Yeah.
Like
you can, that's something you can see coming very, very soon, right?
Yeah.
Even already the improvement in cameras that are focusing in on the speaker and being a bit more intuitive about how the meeting is actually taking place.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that and I talked about was just made for workplace really flexible. As we're thinking about how we're designing these spaces, we need to create places that are more adaptable than ever before because it's going to change. We don't all know how. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about something you alluded to earlier, Lindsay, is real estate and how this is all playing out on the real estate level. There was an article not too long ago from the Wall Street Journal that was called, Even with an Office Glut, Firms Can't Find the Kind of Space that They Want. And that just speaks to those rising expectations and a lot of desire for, different kinds of spaces. And Jayme, I'm curious what you're seeing nationally or here in Dallas in terms of the change in real estate that people are looking for.
Yeah, well, the article kind of made me chuckle, which I'll get to in a second. But I think the easy answer to answer your latter question is I think in Dallas and across the nation, it's certainly that flight to quality is ongoing, and I don't think that's going to change. I think people are seeking those trophy buildings, those AA class buildings that have the amenities, that offer things. So what Lindsay was saying earlier, of that investment is so important, and employees are expecting that from their employers. You know, I think the reasons are obvious. If I'm an employer and I'm trying to draw my employees back in, of course I want the nicest space, right? And if the building can afford me amenities that I then don't have to put out within my space, well, that saves me dollars and allows me to use my space in different ways. So I think the answers of why are kind of no surprise. But the article kind of made me chuckle a little bit because, you know, with all this office space out there and all the nicest, newest stuff out there, people can't find what they're looking for. Well, again, maybe we're putting too much pressure on the building to provide everything, but it's really the people that are what make that community and that collaboration, that camaraderie, and all the things that we've been talking about. So, I mean, I had a client recently say, so if I build it, will they come? And I was like, no, that is not the message. Like, you can build the most beautiful office space and it can sit as empty as it did the day it was done construction if you don't have some sort of place attachment to that space, right? And so there has to be a reason behind the space that we're building, and then people have to understand that why. There has to be purpose behind that space before we can ever talk about this beautiful thing called community. So it's really up to those sort of change engagement people. I'm so thankful. I know Lindsay feels the same, that HR leaders are involved in these conversations today. We could talk forever about the importance of that, but it just makes such a difference.
Yeah. Lindsay, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I would add on, even going beyond the building, that the neighborhoods are the foundation of the network. So the neighborhood is the beginning of the network. I know there's two customers in the audience here with us today that I know chose their buildings because of the larger places where they were set. Because of the energy, because of not just location like it used to be for what's the drive time. That's like old thinking. The new thinking is, and back to this, what's going to attract people? It's a community and a network that stretches beyond that building. We had a customer recently, Invitation Homes, who moved into their space. The HR leader said to us on a call, having lunch together is back. And I love it because it did go away, right? We weren't necessarily prioritizing or valuing, like, whether it's in office or grabbing somebody and going to get lunch somewhere. But that brought joy into my workplace designing heart, that having lunch together is back. So yes, creating community at work starts, to what Jayme was saying, well outside the individual or the workstation. It is that entire network of understanding why you're there, and then having a full offering of why is the place, why does it make you feel good?
Well, you know, I want to talk about that a little bit more. And before we go there, I want to acknowledge what about a lot of business leaders are feeling right now. Everybody's under pressure, you know, I mean, but I think leaders are feeling like they're really concerned about employee engagement, for example. Like, that contributes to this whole issue of community that we've been talking about. And not only engagement, but productivity, just getting to business results. And Lindsay and I were talking earlier about some of Gallup's latest data about employee engagement. It continues to be kind of troubling in terms of you know, the numbers that they're seeing. And I'm just interested, when you are talking with clients about all these factors that they're thinking about, they're kind of going into this equation. How are issues like employee engagement and, you know, wanting to improve their productivity, how are all of those things playing out? Lindsay, do you want to talk about that one first?
Sure. There, immediately whenever you start talking about things like this, it's like, what is the message from the highest levels of the organization? Because we can do whatever we do here in the middle, in the workplace, try to get, you know, new or less tenured employees engaged. But if the messaging, and more importantly, if the behavior isn't matching the prescriptive policies or the mandates or whatever negative clickbait words we want to use, then it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And we see it time and time again. And I think the really concerning thing in this most recent Gallup information is that it's the manager, which we all know, it's the mid-level folks that have all the stress coming from above and all the stress of managing their employees from below. And how are we showing that level that they're valued? And yes, a beautiful workplace matters, and yes, all these things matters, but in that data, it's about training, it's about support, it's about ongoing, mentorship and helping them develop leadership skills. Those are all programs, and policies. So that link coming from the leadership, when senior leaders are really invested in, we want our culture to be this, we want our company to be this, we want our employees to feel a certain way. Well, our job just gets more fun, right? Like building a place that can do all those things is what, the projects we all dream of.
Right. And help shape those kinds of behaviors. Jayme, what are you feeling about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we're able to have these conversations and not kind of get that funny puzzled puppy dog look from leaders, and today is something beautiful in itself, because 5 years ago, if you brought up the idea of community to certain leaders, they would have been like, I'm sorry, we're here to talk about my workplace, not.
Well, and we used to all just sit across from, no shade to CFOs in the world. They are very necessary individuals, but we used to sit just across from the CFO who said, this is the budget, right? And there's 250 people, and come back when you're, and now, sorry to interrupt, Jayme, but that's now we're sitting with a table of people who are incredibly invested in their employees' experience, and it changes the whole conversation.
And hopefully a round table where
hopefully
there's
a round table,
equitable. But
we know some round tables that we can
find somewhere.
We've got some.
Showroom. I think that this is obviously still kind of a polarizing topic, depending on the industry, depending on the leadership type, depending on if you have the HR person or if you're just sitting in, in front of more of kind of the dollars and cents people. It just depends. And so I think as we're starting this conversation, from my side, from the design side, everybody, we sort of have to take the pulse and understanding where kind of on the range is our client at that moment, because we don't want to come in and start talking about community and kumbaya in the break room if they're only focused on, well, how much productivity can we hammer out of every person in this space. So I think that's number one. And I'll be honest, the leaders that we're working with, work is the priority, like it just is. But I think the beauty is when we can start to pull out, like, well, have you thought of this? Well, what if this? The work, and not just the work, I think is the fun part of what we get to do right now.
Yeah. Well, and I would say for anybody whose eyes roll when we talk about community at work, there's actual data that shows that when people feel a sense of community, not only do they have a higher level of engagement, but they also are more productive to, those people who are like,
point. Exactly. There's I think the most recent stat I saw was some 86% of people that have one friend, hopefully more, but one good friend in the office report a higher level of engagement within the office than those that don't. So how can we deny that community isn't important?
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk a little bit more about like how we do this. It's important, but we also need to know, like, how do we take some next steps? So we introduced a concept, an approach to all of this called community-based design. And, it's principles that, Lindsay and Jayme are very familiar with, because they really come from some seminal thinking that we looked at, communities that are really successful, those cities, those neighborhoods that you just get a great vibe and you can't even articulate what it's about, but it's actually quite intentional. So there's some really intentional concepts about, well, mixed use spaces, like you'd be talking about that, or diversity of spaces and lively sidewalks and all of those kinds of attributes that work great in the communities around us. Like you were talking about, Lindsay, before, like that's a important part of the whole infrastructure, is to be in the right community to be able to help create the community. And so, when you talk about some of these things, I know there's some clients who are some doubters, but I'm just curious, like, are these ideas resonating with your clients? Did they get that idea?
I would say yes and no. I think I love this idea that you guys have introduced because I think it's an interesting and different way to talk about it. Because I'm sure even when you said everybody has a city that they thought of, a place that they've been, that they love the energy, that they want to go back. You could even dial that down to your favorite hotel or restaurant. And what is it about that? I think when you talk about urban planning and workplace, the mindset shift that I think we need a little bit is the thing about an urban plan is it is a plan that's fundamentally set forth, but it has room for adjustment.
Yes.
So based on what people end up flocking to, the places that are most popular, an urban plan can evolve over time. And we still sometimes in the workplace think, set it and forget it. It's a 10-year lease. We're going to design this thing, and then we're not going to put any capital dollars to it till we're ready to reevaluate. And I'm not talking about wholesale renovations, but just can we evaluate our meeting room usage every year, every 2 years? Because I've never failed to ask anyone, what's the favorite conference room in your office? And they don't have an answer. Like everybody has a place that they love. Well, this one's not cold, or this one has the best technology, or this one has good light. And so how could we then adapt other rooms to potentially be more attractive, to get higher utilization? So I think using this kind of rubric you guys have set up could really help having a conversation about what makes urban planning successful. How can we think that way when we think about the workplace evolution?
Yeah, I think the point that you made about, communities evolve. They need to evolve. They can't stay stagnant. I think that's such a good point. Jayme, what about you?
Absolutely. I mean, I echo everything. I think to me that kind of what in my mind sort of summarizes a lot of what we're saying is the idea of variety and evolution. And so I think if you think about our workplaces over a span of any given time, really until maybe now, there has not been a lot of variety and there has not been a lot of evolution. If we even think about, the way we program space, like many of you in this room have gone through a programming exercise, and what are the questions you get asked? How many workstations, how many offices, how many, conference rooms, a copy room, a break room, check, right? And same thing with the workstation. They haven't evolved a ton over the years. It's a surface with a monitor. Sometimes they sit, sometimes they stand, but other than that, it's kind of is what it is. And these are all very functional, necessary components to an office. I'm not negating, I'm not trying to destroy, the programming and workstation exercise, but I think that the way that we engage with these spaces, the time spent at these spaces, what we require of these spaces is so different today. And that's where the opportunity really lies. I think, for the first time, it feels like we've been given that permission to question these things, and we don't just have to take it at face value, which I think is really special. And so if we're able to start asking more of those questions of the what ifs and the whys, hopefully that gets to the root of it of, are we doing this because it's the way it's always been done? Or are we doing it because this is actually the right decision to propel that vision and mission and our employees forward? That's the important question.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are looking, well, I think all of our customers, our clients are looking to us to give them some pretty pragmatic solutions, like, well, okay, what do I do about this?
So what?
So what? Exactly. So we want to spend a little time doing kind of a so what. At least we've got a 2 or 3 examples, depending on how much time we've got here, to be able to walk through. And, what we were all talking about as we're preparing for this is, if you go to any organization, no matter how well, they've done in terms of their design work and, thinking through really what people need, there's always those spaces, it feels like, that could just be a little bit better, things that could perform a little bit better than what they are today. So, okay, we're looking at one example right now. In a lot of organizations, your typical kind of team department, this is something that has an opportunity for some improvement. So I'm going to ask you, Lindsay, to walk us through this one, like what you've seen today and how you would make it better.
Well, what's missing is all the boxes and the stuff that would be stacked in that center area because no one ever had a meeting there. I mean, we've all walked into workplaces and you can clock the areas immediately where you're like, no one would ever sit there and have a meeting. So I think the workstation and individual workspaces, we can't vilify that. It's necessary.
Sure.
And Jayme's been getting at this purpose thing since we started the conversation. What is the work that needs to get done? And I think her calling out kind of the old notion of programming of how many workstations, we need to start the conversation of, tell us how work gets done in your organization. And yes, we're going to get to where does the individual work happen. But I think sometimes we shy away from an area that's really functional. Somebody's like, well, you just put a collaborative area in the middle and then it won't look. You have to look at the whole thing together and what are the zones and what's going to get utilized.
So let's take a look at how to make this one better for those of us who are here.
Yes. So exactly what I was just saying, there are 100% individual focused areas there, but then the areas where there's ability to be a bit more visually private in some of those areas. We've recently been having this conversation, very passionate about brain health. And I work with the Center for Brain Health here in Dallas, that our brains aren't really able to multitask.
Right.
You think you can.
Yes.
Really, you're just switching between tasks.
Yep.
And should we also talk about spaces that way? That some spaces are just single task spaces. I think we've gone maybe too far in trying to make every single space be a multi-purpose space. There is high value in certain multi-purpose spaces, but not everything maybe needs to have more than one use. And I think the second layout really addresses that. There are spaces that are specifically for focus. You can see that woman in the back right corner. That is a focus space meant for focus. It probably doesn't have a whole bunch of other.
But you need to have
that. The ability to single task in a space to focus, whether it's in the open or enclosed.
Well, and to your point about brain health, I mean, I think the conversation of neurodiversity in the workspace is so prevalent right now. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think it absolutely should be. I think these sort of spaces allow for people to sort of choose their own adventure. And we can all sort of be working in this same sandbox, but we can all choose the way that we want to work. I might need to focus more and be that woman in the back, whereas Lindsay might need to be collaborating with the team out here. And so we can sort of have that moment all together still. I also think spaces like this for people that are, contemplating a refresh or thinking about a move or whatever it might be, these sort of areas allow you to pilot new ways of working. And so inevitably in a setting like this, you could just take a corner of your office, no bigger than where we're sitting now, and pop some of these stations in and see. Inevitably, there's going to be spaces that people love and there's going to be spaces that people don't gravitate towards, and you can have that flexibility and change things out. So this can really set the stage for setting up a beautiful environment, a functional, purposeful environment going forward.
Because there is still tension on density.
Yes.
I mean, while you can dream up, that you'd love to have all these different settings, there is still a lot of tension on keeping spaces an appropriate density for the market that they're in. That can vary regionally, for sure. But I think we can't lose sight of that either. And so really efficient individual workstations are still vitally important to the ecosystem of the workplace.
And I hope we'll have time to look at a few more of those. I think the points that you're both making that are just really good things for us to remember. One is around that variety. Like that's so important. Again, think about the great communities you love. They're not all the same. They're not all, like a cookie cutter approach. There's a lot of variety. Which people just, I think, inherently love, and it meets their needs. Like you feel like I can find a place that works for me. Like that's really important. And then I also think, for those CFOs who we love, it's easy to adapt. It actually can be kind of a lower cost option if you think about it, because you can adapt easily over time. Let's take a look at another one that I think is kind of interesting. This, you kind of saw a hint of this before, what we call kind of an underperforming lounge. I think we've all been in workplaces where we've seen this lounge setting sitting there and it's got boxes or it's empty. And, some of the folks in the organization go, oh, well, we tried it. Nobody nobody sits there, so let's just put in more desks.
Yeah.
So how do you think, Jayme, let's start with you. How
Yeah,
do you
I
think
mean-
we might make this one better?
We have all been on those tours of client spaces where we walk through and they say, well, we put a couch here, but nobody's ever sat there, but we
Yeah.
tried it. So I guess they don't really want it, you know, and it's so funny. What we don't see in this image, I think, is really where the conversation often starts, is what's the setting around it, you know, like the previous image where Lindsay noted that this setting was in the middle of all the workstations. Well, nobody's going to sit there because you're distracting to everybody else. It looks like you're not working. There's no technology. It's not going to happen. And then my favorite is when we walk by and we see it sitting right outside the CFO's office or the leadership's office. It's like, well, you're going to be dusting that sofa before you ever replace it, because no one is ever going to put their butt in that seat. So the setting, I think, is so important. But, you know, flexibility, technology, being able to modify the space as needed, I think are all things. This starts to show it perfectly, of being able to say, okay, you know what, this meeting, we're going to have more people, so we're going to pull up another chair, or I have power to be able to plug in, and I've got a whiteboard to write on, and I can be sharing a screen, and there's different postures within the space. So it's not about this. Again, I'll say, I told you I was going to be a broken record, purpose, not pretty. So often these spaces are designed to look really pretty, but they don't function. And so if we start to think about, I love the way Lindsay always says that, of how does the work get done, then we can start to use that to inform, well, what does the space need to be? What does the space need to be to get that work done?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love what you're saying, because like I like to sit in those kinds of spaces from time to time at work, but nothing drives me crazier than not having like power or you know, a table that I can put my laptop on, or just things that can help.
When you get going, your laptop dies and you got to move. It's real.
Yeah. The other point I would add is just a little bit of privacy too. You know, this has become such a big issue, I think, in workplaces, that there's a lot of different ways that we can give people privacy. It doesn't always have to be four walls and a door, and just even adding a little bit of screening, just so you don't feel so exposed. Yeah, I think is an important thing.
I think the question that the design teams just need to ask when you show these things to your clients is, who can you see using this? Because they look great. I mean, and so here we come with a beautiful image and beautiful furniture, and they will fall in love with it. And so you've got to make sure you're saying, okay, which team can you envision in this space? Which of the meetings that you ran down with, is this your Monday morning stand up? Is this your, who can you see here? Because they know, they'll say, oh, well, no, they would never use that because they're showing confidential information. What about, no, they would never use that. And so if you don't have an answer, it doesn't mean the space needs to get walled off and turn into something completely different, but you should keep going with let's talk about who would embrace this type of space and what they need. Just a little bit more conversation.
Those are all good thoughts. I think we've got time for one more before we go to Q&A. So let's just take a look at, I've seen a lot of this. These,
is there anything wrong with that?
I've seen a lot of these big conference rooms, lots of chairs, and like two people, one person sitting there by themselves. So Lindsay, talk about this one for us. Like, what could we do to make that better?
It's like a love-hate relationship where you again, understanding what's needed. But to me, the first thing that comes up when I see this room is the importance of the AV-IT programming being so early in the process, because what really falls flat, so maybe an organization does need a fairly traditional conference room, but do we know what they're showing on that screen? Because if it's a bunch of spreadsheets, then the room is a total fail. It doesn't, the rest of it doesn't even matter. So that really, really early AV-IT programming with the right people at the table. And I think everybody's antennas up, because sometimes that's where we meet resistance is if those folks in your organization aren't open to looking at new technologies, looking at new user interface, looking at ways to potentially improve the experience, then the furniture in the room is going to be the afterthought. The pretty part is going to be the afterthought.
So let's do a pilot here. This is a new way of thinking about it. What do you think?
I mean, here clearly so let's assume that the program here was, we don't have really large meetings. We have smaller meetings where people are coming in and out of them, a lot of focus on the screen and the ability to really have everybody at the table. I would assume that organization almost always has somebody on the camera on the other side because they've really set those tables up so that everybody feels engaged in the room. And there you see the marker board on the other side so that you have multiple ways to engage. So there, my summation would be, there was just a lot more understanding about how they meet.
Yeah.
I think a fun exercise, if people in the audience are sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, this is resonating hitting too close to home. And, you know, you're thinking about some of our workrooms don't work or conference rooms don't work, or you're embarking on a new plan or a new design, is have a meeting in those rooms that seem to not work. Hold a meeting there intentionally and just watch the posture of people around you. Are people constantly having to like lean forward or lean back to see around each other or to see the screen? You know, are people constantly getting up? And we've all seen those people that get up and go to the screen and say, I can't see that. Is the screen too small? Is the orientation wrong? Let's not forget about those virtual people. Are the people on the call constantly getting forgotten about or talked over because their head is this small on the table or on the screen and it's up high, not down with us? So there's just so many things that just even those nonverbal cues that when you're in your meeting room, you can start to say, oh, maybe we do need to add a whiteboard because she keeps writing everything down and then showing me her notepad. So just things like that that can help design the space without even having to, you know, do a survey or ask the question.
Yeah. I'm also a big fan of being able to have some little individual spaces kind of, you know, tucked in the back. I think if we pull that slide back up for a minute here, you know, I think it really helps people toggle between doing individual work and collaborative work. Like you really need to go back and forth. And sometimes, you know, I need to be ready before I go into a meeting or after I come out of it, you know, so just being able to have those spaces in close proximity, you know, that feels really helpful to me.
And you know, these are difficult decisions because the cost of everything has never been higher. So it's not like every single room can be completely knocked out. So I do think understanding what is going to be utilized most frequently and then communicating that. Hey, this is our setup for this is where these meetings need to happen because this is the best setup. And we might not have the perfect setup for this gathering that only happens 2 times a year. We're going to make do. And sharing how you prioritize and why, because it's very few customers today that can just say, oh yeah, let's just do it all.
Wipe it up.
Right. Okay. I want to pull some more people into this conversation right now. And so my very helpful editor also at Work Better Magazine and producer of this event, Stav Kontis, is standing by with some questions. Do we have some questions from a remote audience, Stav?
International question from Mike in British Columbia, who wants to know, how do we go about creating a vibrant, productive workplace with BNC buildings, looking for best practices?
Ooh.
Lindsay, go ahead.
That's that's a hard one.
In BNC.
In BNC, I mean, and so when you talk about the glut of real estate and that people can't find what they need, there's not a glut of real estate in Class A and AA. It is in these BNC spaces. And so some of the shift there, like, so we were talking about the neighborhood, you might not have the top neighborhood and the neighborhood as your network. I do think you have to then start to really examine which amenities that we're providing inside of our space are going to be most impactful to our employees, because they might not have the cool coffee shop down the street. So I would certainly, in those situations, really encourage those organizations to pull employees into that discussion and really find out what's going to matter to them. And that would be the foundation of where I would recommend a customer invest.
Yeah.
Do you want to add to that?
I'll add too. I mean, don't underestimate the power of an offsite meeting too. I think that it can be really powerful, whether you're in an A or a B or a C building, to get out of your own space and to go somewhere else. And it allows you to think more creatively. I mean, I know a lot of times when we do a visioning session, we purposely ask the client, can we do this in our office, or can we do this somewhere else, to get them out of their environment? So, you know, as echoing everything Lindsay said, maybe another option is also to hold things outside of your office just for additional variety. Yeah.
That's great. Stab, do you want to take one from our live audience or another virtual question just to warm up?
Virtual question.
Okay.
When budget is frozen, what can be done to tweak existing spaces? What is the biggest bang for the buck?
Oh,
the biggest bang for the buck.
When budget's frozen.
When budget is frozen, like nothing? Is this a CFO? Asking for a friend.
So we're gonna have to assume we have a little something to work with.
Yeah.
I mean, when the lighting is bad, my colleague is like, that's what she was gonna say too. When the lighting is bad, it kind of doesn't matter what else you do. If there was one, and I think in B and C spaces, sometimes that you go in on that tour and they flip those lights and the creepy, flicker on happens. I think lighting quality has such an impact on how people feel throughout the day. I would probably attack surprisingly lighting first. I've been in spaces where the lighting has been replaced and people will swear that the carpet was changed, that the walls were repainted, because it can just liven everything up. So that would you're going to have to scrape up some money, but work on the lighting.
What about you, Jayme?
I think that's a really, nothing I can say would trump that. I literally toured 2 spec suites the other day. One, the landlord had replaced the lighting and nothing else. And the other one we toured and we were like, oh, so when are you going to do the finishes here? And he was like, oh, it's just the lighting. So, I mean, that's a perfect example to what you're saying of the other space felt so grim compared to the other one. And it was just, that was the refresh. So if you can scrape together a few dollars, lighting.
Okay, I have to weigh in on this one, because
please.
I mean, lighting is all important, but your furniture is going to make a difference, right? Like, and in all seriousness, the biggest issue that we hear from employees is around privacy. And it's not that everybody wants a private office, but a lot of times you're just working in spaces where, we talked before, you feel overexposed. You can't focus. It's, you've got, you're neurodiverse. You need to control some of the stimulation. So, I mean, I would add to that, like, could you weave in some privacy elements for people to be able to, help make that a little bit better?
I have to add that this is a little off topic, but I think it ties into what you're saying. I think so much of design today, we are focused on socialization and community, rightfully so, right? But at the same time, not everybody gets recharged in that manner, right? Like we do a lot of work with engineers. There's a lot of more kind of introverted folks in the engineering world, same with some architects and across the spectrum, not necessarily to single out any industry, but I think as much as we need to be thinking about these social, fun, cool, together spaces, we also need to balance that out with the privacy and the moments where people can kind of retreat away.
Yeah. Well, and I have a lot of people who ask me, well, why you're talking about community, but why privacy? But if you think of any great community, I mean,
you have variety.
You have residences. You have your back porch, or the place that you can go to be alone. You can't, or places in your parks where you have to tuck away a little bit. So community doesn't mean you always have to be together. Sometimes it means being alone. Okay, do we have any more questions?
We're ready for our audience.
Look at that.
Front row.
How brave.
I was curious what your thoughts are about creating community. I've seen a lot of our clients and organizations that are really going to this more of a shared, unassigned seating model, and how that has impacted them building community in their workspace. Curious what your thoughts are on how companies can best address this need for more efficient and use of their space, but also building community in this way.
Do you want to go first?
I think you're probably the expert on it.
Okay. So the seat sharing, desk sharing is difficult. And I think you have to start by addressing a lot of people don't like that. And that's just human nature. I think Jayme said place attachment earlier. I mean, people like knowing where they're going. So if that is part of your strategy, which it is a very worthy workplace strategy to increase density, based on how you work and the work that needs to get done, that's where you have to be honest about the technology solutions to support it. Because when we talk to people about what frustrates them about it, it often comes down to time. I would say that's the thing I hear more and more often. From the time I get to the door of the office, it's 15 minutes, it's 20 minutes before I get to my desk, get my stuff out, get connected, realize I forgot something, have to go, get a spare one from IT. And so if you have the foundation and the technology for booking, I know exactly where I'm going. I don't think it can be used as a cost saving measure. It can be used as a density increasing measure 100%, but then you've got to understand what systems and platforms do we need to really make that a positive user experience.
And don't you find, I mean, people are such creatures of habit. Don't you find that so often people end up booking the same desk and sitting in the same spot, even if they're given that freedom? And I've heard of some companies, the technology they use actually doesn't allow them to book the same seat for a certain number of days in a row, which that would frustrate me. But, so it's like, why, again, it kind of goes back to the why, like, why are you doing this agile environment? What's the reason? It's not going to save you necessarily money. Is it, how does it lend itself to the work that you're doing?
We have seen the neighborhood concept work well for some class. So they generally, to your point, they know where their colleagues are going to be, some area, and that takes out that first decision. Back to the very first topic we talked about today. So that would be my response.
I think that's all the time we have for questions today. If you're here live, we will talk more. Anybody who's online will get to your questions in the chat. So thank you. And I did want to say, if any of the spaces that we looked at earlier, if you find those interesting, they're all in our latest issue of Work Better magazine, which we have here for those of you who are in person. And for those of you who are joining us virtually, you can just click on the QR code and that will bring you to a site where you can subscribe. We'd love to have you subscribe to Work Better magazine. And so if any of you are ready to start today building community at work, you can reach out to Lindsay, Jayme. You could reach out to your Steelcase rep or our great dealers who are all total local experts on these topics. So we're just so grateful that you came today and that you joined us virtually. I'm grateful to Lindsay and to Jayme for being here with us today. And we hope that your day at work tomorrow is just a little bit better.